There is a particular kind of heartbreak that becomes almost impossible to explain because nothing about it looks final. They are gone, but somewhere inside you, you can still feel that you mattered. You can sense that they remember you. You can imagine certain moments when something unexpectedly reminds them of who you were, and for a second, the distance between you seems to disappear. Yet they still do not return. That is what makes this kind of loss so psychologically brutal. If they hated you, leaving would make sense. If they stopped caring, you could eventually accept it. But when someone can miss you deeply and still choose a life without you, you are forced to confront a truth that hurts far more than rejection. Sometimes missing someone is not enough to overcome the reasons you left them behind. Because people often misunderstand what missing someone actually means. They imagine that when a person misses you, some invisible force is pulling them back toward you. But missing is not the same as choosing. A person can ache for your presence while believing that returning to you would reopen everything they struggled to escape. They can remember your warmth, your laugh, the way you made ordinary moments feel strangely significant, and still remember the parts of the relationship that made them feel trapped, inadequate, frightened, or emotionally exhausted. The mind does something cruel after separation. It separates the person from the entire experience. It allows them to miss the beautiful parts without forgetting why they decided they could no longer live inside the whole story. That is why their silence can feel so confusing. You may think, if I meant something to them, why aren't they here? But emotional significance and behavioral choice are not the same thing. Someone can consider you one of the most important people they have ever known and still decide that being with you costs them something they are unwilling to pay anymore. Love can survive inside a person long after their willingness to participate in the relationship has disappeared. And this is where people often spend months trying to decode a contradiction that isn't actually a contradiction at all. They miss you because you mattered. They stay away because the relationship became something they could no longer carry. Sometimes what they miss isn't even the relationship itself. They miss who they were when they were with you. They miss the version of themselves that existed in that particular chapter of their life. Maybe they felt understood in a way they rarely experience. Maybe they felt desired, protected, admired, or completely known. Maybe you witnessed a side of them that nobody else had access to. When you disappear, that version of themselves disappears too, and the loss can become strangely personal. They are not simply grieving you. They are grieving an identity that only existed around you. This explains why memories can become more powerful after separation. When someone is no longer living inside the daily reality of a relationship, the mind begins editing the experience. The irritating habits become less vivid. The repetitive arguments lose their emotional intensity. The moments of closeness become sharper. A familiar expression, a particular place, a certain sound, even the memory of sitting beside you can suddenly carry an emotional weight that it never seemed to have while you were together. Distance creates an illusion of purity around certain memories because the conflict is no longer happening in real time. They can remember the feeling without having to confront everything that came with it. And sometimes that is exactly why they refuse to come back. Because returning would destroy the fantasy that distance has created. From far away, they can preserve the best parts of you. They can remember your tenderness without having to confront the arguments. They can miss your presence without dealing with the expectations that came with being together. They can privately wonder what might have happened if things had been different, while never having to discover whether those things actually could have been different. Distance protects the memory from reality. Coming back would force them to replace imagination with experience, and sometimes people would rather miss someone beautifully than risk losing the fantasy of them again. There is another reason people refuse to return even when they still have feelings: pride. Not the shallow kind of pride that simply refuses to admit being wrong, but the deeper psychological need to believe that the decision they made was necessary. Once someone walks away, they often construct an internal explanation that allows them to live with the loss. They tell themselves that leaving was the mature choice, the necessary choice, the only choice. The longer they remain away, the more psychologically expensive it becomes to admit that they may still want what they abandoned. Because admitting that they miss you creates a dangerous question: if I miss them this much, did I make the wrong decision? And people do not always want answers to questions like that. So they learn to live with the contradiction. They carry the memory quietly. They wonder about you occasionally. They remember details they thought they had forgotten. They may even compare new experiences to what they once had with you, not because every new person is inferior, but because emotional familiarity leaves a very specific imprint on the nervous system. Once someone has experienced a particular kind of connection, the absence of it can become noticeable in ways they cannot easily explain. Yet even then, they may not return. Because another psychological force can be stronger than longing: self-protection. If being close to you once made them feel vulnerable, uncertain, powerless, or emotionally exposed, then missing you can actually become part of the reason they stay away. The person they miss may be the same person they believe they cannot safely love again. That creates an internal conflict where desire pulls them toward the memory while fear pushes them away from the reality. The farther they remain from you, the safer they feel. The closer they imagine getting, the more everything they tried to suppress threatens to come alive again. This is why some people seem strangely determined to maintain a distance they secretly hate. They are not necessarily indifferent. Sometimes they are protecting themselves from the intensity of what they still feel. And there is something even more painful about this: you may never receive confirmation of any of it. You may never know which memories stayed with them. You may never know whether they still think about the places you shared, the conversations that changed something inside them, or the version of themselves they became around you. You may never know whether they occasionally wonder how your life turned out. Human beings can carry entire emotional worlds inside themselves without ever revealing them to the person who created them. That is what makes unresolved relationships so haunting. There is no clean ending because the ending happened behaviorally, not emotionally. The relationship stopped, but the emotional residue did not disappear at the same speed. One person may walk away physically while still carrying the other person psychologically. They can build routines, make decisions, create distance, and continue their life while some small part of them remains attached to a chapter they refuse to reopen. And this is where the cruelest realization appears: someone missing you does not mean they are coming back. Sometimes they miss you precisely because they know they are not coming back. They know that if they returned, they would have to confront everything they have spent months teaching themselves to live without. They would have to face the unresolved resentment, the old fears, the reasons they left, and the possibility that love alone cannot repair what love once failed to protect. They may still feel something enormous for you while understanding that feeling something and building a life around it are completely different decisions. So if you ever wondered how someone could miss you and still remain gone, the answer may be hidden in the difference between emotional attachment and emotional capacity. They may have enough feeling to remember you, but not enough capacity to recreate what you had. They may have enough longing to revisit the memories, but not enough courage to revisit the relationship. They may carry your absence more deeply than you will ever know while still choosing not to disturb the life they built after you. And perhaps that is why certain people never really disappear. Not because they were destined to return, but because some relationships become permanent psychological landmarks. You stop living beside the person, but some part of you continues measuring later experiences against what happened there. Years can pass, and the memory may become quieter without becoming meaningless. The person becomes less of a presence and more of a reference point, a reminder of who you once were, what you once felt, and what you once believed another human being could become to you. Maybe they have done the same. Maybe somewhere inside them, you exist in exactly that strange place, not in their life, but not entirely outside it either. And that is the part nobody tells you about losing someone who still cares. Sometimes there is no final moment when the feelings disappear. There is simply a decision that becomes stronger than the feelings. A person can miss you, love parts of you, remember you with tenderness, and still keep walking in the opposite direction. Not because you meant nothing, but because meaning is not always enough to make someone return. Sometimes the person who misses you the most is the person who has already convinced themselves that they have to live without you. And somewhere, beneath all the distance, the memories remain exactly where they were left, alive enough to hurt, quiet enough to hide, and powerful enough to remind them that there was once a person they could not imagine losing. You just became the person they learned how to lose.